Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a source you shared with us, an article in TATANKA,
Hmm.
and it describes this really unique concept album called When Salt Sings. It's framed as an AI-generated sound journey, and wow, it goes deep.
It really does. So our mission today is basically to unpack this fascinating piece, just, using that article as our guide.
Yeah.
It explores some incredibly profound themes: grief, transformation, and this really arresting idea of a floating soul.
What's so interesting, I think, is how the article doesn't just talk about the music itself. It really digs into the why behind it all.
Right.
The layers of meaning that are kind of baked into the album's structure, its symbolism. It pulls out these key ideas that, well, they feel pretty central to understanding the whole thing.
Exactly. It frames the album as like way more than just songs. It's about how sound, these powerful metaphors, and even ancient spiritual ideas get woven together.
To sort of map the landscape of human emotion
Yeah.
and transformation.
Yeah, precisely. That complex landscape.
So this isn't just about audio then. It's about how sound can almost act as a guide, maybe even a ritual space. Let's unpack this journey.
Okay, so the article describes when Salt sings as tracing this powerful feminine metamorphosis, and this journey, it unfolds across four distinct acts.
Right, these four acts.
Okay.
First, unseen guilt, then there's fracturing, after that, a descent into shadow, and finally this act of floating. It sounds, quite deliberately designed to move the listener through specific emotional phases.
Absolutely. It guides you through these evolving states. And it uses this blend of ambient textures, pretty minimal lyrics actually, and really rich symbolic layering.
Mhm.
The article points out three central subtopics that really, define the impact of the album.
And those are the juicy bits, the
Yes.
symbolism, right? Water and salt.
Yeah, that's the first one. Then, the psychological power held within the album's sonic architecture.
Right.
And third, how it's grounded in these feminine spiritual frameworks like Shakti and Navaratri.
Right.
And when you look at these things together, the article suggests they converge to create something that feels, well, as much like a meditative ritual as it does a record.
Okay, let's jump into that first big idea from the article then.
Mhm.
The symbolism of water and salt. It talks about water's like ancient role as a spiritual force across so many cultures.
It does. And in this album, water isn't just some abstract theme floating around. It's actually integrated right into the sound design. You hear things like submerged pulses, echoes, sounds that mimic breathwork running through the tracks.
So it's tangible in the audio, but it's also used as a potent metaphor, isn't it?
Definitely.
Representing this idea of inner purification that comes through suffering.
Hmm.
Holding it, bearing it, and ultimately transforming. A bit like the Ganges reference in the article, that kind of sacred river idea.
Exactly that. And then you have salt. The article positions salt in this really interesting way. It goes beyond just, flavor or preservation.
How so?
It's seen as the residue of grief, the sacred trace left by tears, maybe? What the body just can't contain anymore. It's described as what remains after everything else seems to dissolve away.
That imagery is incredibly powerful. The article mentions a specific track, The Salt Remains.
Yes.
It apparently uses sparse piano and ambient static, and the description makes it sound like you can almost hear the negative space salt leaves behind, like evoking this sense of a body preserved in absence or a love mineralized by grief.
And the way the article talks about it, salt's presence becomes almost tactile. It's in the careful choices of frequencies, the use of silence. Where words might fail to capture that full weight of emotion, that feeling of salt just lingers in the sound itself. It's quite something.
So within this album's context, water and salt together are framed as carriers of feminine energy. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly how the article frames it. They evoke things like emotional intelligence, cyclical wisdom, this deep idea of bodily truth. They're even called ancient technologies for coping and cleansing.
Ancient technologies, I like
It's
that. And this all leads towards the album's final movement, presumably.
Exactly. The article notes that the final track, which is apparently filled with water effects and these breathy sounds, suggests buoyancy.
But not like escaping.
No, that's the key. Floating isn't presented as an escape from the pain, but more like a form of survival through it. The feminine energy here isn't just fragile. It's shown as durable, adaptive, regenerative.
Okay, that concept of the album building something really powerful through sound itself brings us neatly to the next idea the article focuses on: the psychological power of the sonic architecture.
Right. Concept albums often do this, don't they? They build emotional resonance through their structure. And here, in When Salt Sings, that psychological journey is embedded in how the sound textures evolve across those 4 acts we mentioned.
So if we look at Act 1, The Weight of Unseen Guilt, the article mentions tracks like Gate of Solitude or People Leave Like Smoke. What's the sound meant to feel like there?
Well, the article talks about clean acoustics, a kind of lyrical innocence in those early tracks. They might use sounds like distant bells or maybe fading synths to evoke that isolation, that sense of clarity before things start to break down.
Okay.
There's even a line quoted, "Did I fade away or did you?" which really captures that early torment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And then as the story progresses, Act 2, Fracture and Emergence, and Act 3, Descent into the Shadow. What happens to the sound?
That's where the sound starts to mirror the internal chaos. The article notes things like instruments becoming detuned, voices might get distorted, rhythms fracture. And this isn't just random experimentation. It's very much designed to replicate states like dissociation or rage or even numbness.
So it's trying to put you in that headspace sonically.
Pretty much. For instance, Act 2 has a track called Ghastly Voice. The description says the shadow self emerges there with pitch-shifted, really eerie vocals, and a line like, "You were never enough, I am." Yeah. And then Act 3, there's Shadow Embrace, using dark wave sounds to embody that takeover, maybe even repeating that unsettling phrase.
Wow. So the sounds themselves are really creating that feeling of breakdown and descent.
Precisely. The article mentions techniques like vocal manipulation or reversed melodies apparently used in an Act 3 track called Reversal to depict fractured memory, looping trauma, or just ambient washes. They're used quite deliberately to distort our sense of time and identity. It reflects how memory can just shatter under intense emotional strain. It's like the sound is inviting you, the listener, to be a co-witness to this whole internal process.
And then the article mentions silence and minimalism starting to appear later on, particularly in Act 3 and 4.
Yes, exactly. Especially in tracks like The Salt Remains in Act 3, which we touched on, or generally in Act 4. This seems to create space for reflection, a shift away from that fragmentation towards something, I don't know, more spacious.
A new self.
Kind of. The article calls it floating above the need for definition. The sonic architecture shifts from chaos to something more ritualistic almost. A space for processing what's happened.
That sense of ritual. That brings us straight to the third major idea highlighted by the article. These feminine spiritual frameworks, specifically Shakti and Navaratri.
Right. This is where the album seems to draw on Indian spiritual traditions for maybe a deeper scaffolding. Shakti, which is that fundamental principle of divine feminine energy in Hinduism. You know, the force of creation, destruction, and transformation.
And the article actually makes a connection between the album's 4 acts and phases associated with the Navaratri festival.
It does, yeah. Navaratri is that 9-night festival honoring the goddess Durga. The article suggests the listener moves through the album's sonic spaces, almost like moving through ritual spaces during the festival itself.
Interesting.
And like Shakti herself, the feminine energy in the album is shown embracing duality, fire and water, shadow and light. It reflects those non-dualistic teachings.
Navaratri's narrative often involves defeating inner and outer challenges, right?
Okay.
And honoring different aspects of the divine feminine. How does that parallel the album's structure leading to the end?
Well, the journey through the acts seems to mirror that process. It ultimately leads towards a sense of transcendence and stillness, much like the 9th night of Navaratri symbolizes.
Right.
The article even highlights the fact that the album has 9 tracks. It links this number 9 to the idea of the ascension of the feminine in Indian culture, aligning directly with Shakti and Navaratri.
So the floating woman figure at the end isn't just some random image. The article interprets her as the number 9 incarnate.
That's the interpretation offered, yes. Resting, rising, remembering, carried by the river of those who came before her. It suggests that by embedding these references, the music encourages a deeper, maybe more devotional or at least reflective form of listening.
And this feels like quite a powerful counterpoint to maybe more common Western tropes of feminine vulnerability or fragility.
I think so, yeah. It presents the feminine as enduring, as ritualized, connected to these cosmic cycles. The floating figure becomes less of a victim and more of an archetype, you know?
Yeah.
An ascendant spirit on this journey of reclaiming body, voice, self.
Let's think about that final act then, Act 4, the floating soul.
Mm-hmm.
What does the article say about the sound and the feeling there, specifically?
It describes tracks like Drift as being these dreamlike ambient pieces suggesting detachment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line mentioned, I am not here, kind of fragmented.
Hmm.
There's also a second track titled Float, which apparently has a lullaby motif symbolizing maybe soul detachment or just that buoyancy we talked about. And the closing track, Rebirth, is described as ethereal.
That track Rebirth sounds like it really ties everything together. The article quotes some really impactful lines from it.
Yes, it does. Lines like, the pain was soil where I learned how to rise,
Wow.
and I made my wings from the tears in my eyes. It really speaks directly to that metamorphosis, doesn't it? Transforming trauma into a new path, a new way of being.
So bringing this back to you listening, this deep dive into When Salt Sings, just through the lens of this one article, it really shows how art, even art described as AI-generated, can create this kind of sacred space for emotional transformation.
Yeah.
It maps these journeys that, well, many of us might recognize in ourselves or maybe in others we know.
It really does. The album's use of these elemental metaphors, water and salt, its intentional sonic structure, and its integration of these powerful spiritual frameworks. It offers such different ways to understand and maybe navigate the incredibly complex terrain of grief and change.
So we've explored how When Salt Sings, at least as described in this TATANKA article, uses the potent language of water and salt, the deliberate architecture of its sound, and the wisdom drawn from Shakti and Navaratri to guide listeners through what sounds like a really profound journey of grief and transformation.
It leaves us with this powerful idea, I think, that an album can be more than just entertainment. It can function as a ritual, maybe a personal journey, a kind of modern myth.
Offering a path not really to escape difficult emotions, but maybe to find a kind of sovereignty within them, even in stillness.
Exactly. Sovereignty and stillness. That's a great way to put it.
So what stands out to you from this deep dive? How does thinking about music as, say, ritual architecture or elements like salt being soul carriers, how does that change how you might listen to music or even think about creative expression yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. And as you reflect on that, maybe consider the album's conclusion, that powerful idea of rebirth, where pain becomes soil and tears become wings.
Right.
This work floats, the article says, not as escape, but as sovereignty. And that really raises an important question to maybe sit with for a while. What does it truly mean to find sovereignty, especially after feeling shattered?